think we're going to get started, and I just want to say welcome. Welcome to everybody who's here participating today, and we're going to have some members coming in and out. But I just want to begin by saying a few things. Sometimes, amid all the turmoil going on in the world, Americans wonder why they should care about Hong Kong. Why should they care about what the Chinese Communist Party does thousands of miles away? Why should we worry when the CCP imprisons its critics, silences free speech, and breaks its solemn promise to allow the people of Hong Kong to govern themselves under their own laws? The answer is that the core values of the American people are at stake. When the Chinese Communist Party breaks its word to respect the freedom of Hong Kong through one country, two systems, it's breaking its word to the entire world. The national security law that it pushed through criminalized dissent about Beijing's claims to Hong Kong and even placed bounties on American citizens for their advocacy for Hong Kong. It has made clear that the CCP law applies to everyone, everywhere in the world. These actions set up a stark contrast over the nature of society. Does authority derive from the consent of a free people, or does it derive from the abstractions of men like Karl Marx or Mao Zedong? There's no First Amendment in China, no right to free speech, and no elections. Our select committee was founded on the belief that freedom will be the victor, and that there are God-given rights that our government must respect. The Chinese Communist Party believes there are no rights endowed by our Creator, only subjects. In fact, Article 54 of the CCP's Constitution declares that citizens shall have the obligation to safeguard the security, honor, and interests of the motherland. They must not behave in any way that endangers the motherland's security, honor, or interests. Article 50 of the CCP's Constitution then proclaims their law is global. If they consider you Chinese and you break Chinese law while living in the United States, they will come for you. Even if you're an American citizen, like Joey Siu, who is with us today. Joey was born in North Carolina and currently resides in the United States, but that makes no difference to the Chinese Communist Party. The Hong Kong police have placed a bounty of $128,000 on her head. At a time when 600 million people in China survive on less than $140 a month, the CCP chose to spend almost 1,000 times that to silence a brave 25-year-old American who challenged their rule. In 2019, Francis Hui, who also joins us today, committed an unforgivable sin in the eyes of Beijing. She challenged their ownership over her city, her people, and her soul. She uttered the words, "I am from Hong Kong, not China." Those words were uttered not from Hong Kong or China, but from Boston, Massachusetts, where Francis was then a junior at Emerson College. They appeared in Emerson's student newspaper in a land protected by the American Constitution. After that, Francis faced threats in Boston, including from a Chinese student who posted, "Whoever opposes my greatest China, no matter how far they are, must be executed." But despite this, Francis returned home to Hong Kong to fight for freedom. She soon found herself persecuted for the words she had written for a student newspaper in America, and she had to seek asylum here in the land of the free. Francis still faces threats from agents of the CCP today, and it's because what scares them is the truth in her words. The CCP says the Chinese people are unfit for democracy and that everyone in the territory Beijing claims is Chinese. Francis's crime was to point out that she and millions like her did not consider themselves Chinese, but rather Hong Kongers. It's the same reason the CCP silenced the city and the people of Hong Kong as well. not because one country, two systems had failed, but because if it succeeded, there would be no need for the CCP. Jimmy Lai understood the importance of truth and the threat it posed to the Chinese Communist Party. For years, Apple Daily, which he edited, held Hong Kong officials to account for their corruption, while demanding the CCP abide by the promises it had made to Hong Kongers. A devout Catholic, Jimmy challenged fellow believers like former Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam and current Chief Executive John Lee to speak out against the persecution of the church and the imprisonment of Cardinal Joseph Zen. For this challenge, Apple Daily was shuttered, its offices ransacked, and its editorial team prosecuted. Jimmy was arrested nearly 4 years ago and is now on trial for sedition. Jonathan Price, who is with us today, is a member of Jimmy Lai's legal team. We appreciate him being here to speak for Jimmy, who is still imprisoned. And we look forward to hearing more from him shortly. Some will say the battle is lost. Hong Kong has fallen to the CCP, and we need to accept the oppression of its new rulers. But I reject that. Our select committee believes that freedom will be the victor, and I believe our God-given rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness are inalienable rights for every person. And I want to turn the mic over now to Ranking Member Krishnamurthy.
Thank you, Chair Molinar, and thank you to my fellow members, and thank you to our witnesses, and thank you for your bravery in coming here. And Francis, I think that you have spoken with us before, and it's great to see you again as well. Look, I think that at the time of the handover, we were promised one country, two systems. Instead, what we see is one country, one system, one party, one ruler, Xi Jinping. Let there be no mistake that one man has decided that Hong Kong is no longer going to abide, or the conception of Hong Kong will not abide by what was promised to the rest of the world, including the British, during the handover. Of course, we've heard about the national security law, which you eloquently described. But now they have something called the National Security Law 2.0, NSL 2.0, and it's as buggy as 1.0. 2.0 criminalizes more political activities and severely tightens existing restrictions, including with respect to criticizing the government. They call that sedition. Criticism equals sedition. They say that if you obtain and reveal information that paints the government in a bad light, that is somehow state secrets. And working with foreigners and foreign organizations is called external interference. These are Orwellian descriptions of words that we know mean very different things than how they've defined them. So, as you have rightfully said, Congress should take action. Congress should take action. Right now, the law's prohibitions, NSL 2.0, is extraterritorial in nature, and that flies in the face of everything that we know as Americans to be right, and therefore we should take measures to deal with that aspect of it. The law undermines internationally accepted norms for individual rights, not to mention a host of other agreements, including Hong Kong's obligations under the Sino-British Joint Declaration and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. In addition, by criminalizing many types of interactions with foreign organizations, the law jeopardizes Hong Kong's role as an open international city. And quite frankly, one of the most chilling stories somebody told me was that they recently visited China, and as usual, when they were sitting down with their interlocutors in China, everything was very scripted, and they acted. The interactions feel scripted. people feel monitored, and kind of the basic liberties and freedoms that people had once been promised no longer exist. So that is why we're here. That's why we're here to highlight the plight of Hong Kong and to hear your stories. And again, thank you for coming in today.
Well, now I'd like to just have each of you maybe share an opening statement, but I spoke a little bit about you in my remarks, but I just want to thank you for being here, and we really want to hear directly from you and get your thoughts, and then what we plan to do is have we start with you, if that's all right.
for Hong Kong's democratic freedoms to be passed, called for sanctions against Hong Kong Chinese officials who have violated human rights inside of Hong Kong. And for that, I was being charged for colluding with foreign forces, which means I have been colluding with my own representatives here in the U.S., and then have me being put on the wanted list with a $1 million Hong Kong dollar bounty. And, you know, obviously what follows the arrest warrant and also the bounty was a series of nonstop death threats, online harassment, defamation campaign, all of these. And very unfortunately, my situation, my scenario is really just the tip of the iceberg, as we have always been saying, of this massive transnational repression scheme orchestrated by the Chinese Communist regime against Hong Kongers, Tibetans, Uyghurs, all on American soil, in the forms of, you know, infiltration, spying, coercion, holding our family members as hostages, having their secret police stations open on American soil. And all of these are the scenarios, the situations that we are dealing on a day-to-day, daily basis. And to go even further, as both the chairman and the ranking member have noted, the Hong Kong government passed the yet another legislation with extraterritorial reach, the Article 23, which essentially subjects, as the ranking member have noted, not just only all of the Hong Kongers, but also American citizens like me, to lengthy imprisonments inside of Hong Kong if they dare to even criticize the Hong Kong government or the Chinese government, which would include, you know, hanging up a banner that says "Free Hong Kong" in Hong Kong. That would get you 10 years to lifetime in prison in Hong Kong under this new Article 23. And again, unfortunately, you know, coming back to the U.S., that did not guarantee me safety. The U.S. as my country, as a leader in the democracy world, is not doing enough to protect me as an American citizen, to protect other American citizens inside of Hong Kong, outside of Hong Kong, other Hong Kongers, other diaspora members who are currently residing in the U.S., who have fought on the very, very front lines against the CCP's encroachment of our freedom and democracy. We're not doing enough to protect them. You know, last week, the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office in the UK, the HAETO, was being found by the UK government that they had paid 3 British nationals to spy on the Hong Kong diaspora right there. They have been, you know, obviously following the Hong Kong diaspora organizers. They have even forced entry into prominent activists located in London in the UK. And quoting what the UK government said, it says that these 3 British nationals have been charged with assisting a foreign intelligence service by agreeing to undertake information gathering, surveillance, and acts of deception. It cannot be more apparent that these Hong Kong economic and trade offices, they are so much more than just an institution by the Hong Kong government to promote purely trade, business, and economy, they are very, very apparent at this point that they are the extended branches of the CCP that does so much more than that. They are the arms of the propaganda machine. They are the overseas police stations of the Hong Kong government that surveils and spies on Hong Kong activists and American citizens here on American soil. They are an intelligence institution that fuels the transnational repression against our community overall. And the question is, right now we have 3 Hong Kong economic and trade offices across the U.S. in Washington, D.C., in New York, and San Francisco. And the question is, why are we still allowing them to operate on American soil? Why are we allowing them to collect intelligence, act as an intelligence institution for the Chinese Communist government to spy on Hong Kong activists here seeking a safe haven in the U.S. and on me, myself, as an American citizen? Why are we not closing them down? You know, this committee, especially our chairperson and also our ranking member, I'm sure you have heard so many testimonies from Tibetan activists and Uyghur activists who have very in detail documented their experience of facing transnational repression, having their family members back in East Turkestan, back in Tibet being held hostages, and under police monitoring and pressure, their family members as hostages have to give them a call, encourage them, discourage them from continue advocating for their very deserved democratic rights here in America. And very unfortunately, if our country, if the U.S., this Congress, this administration does not take concrete actions right now to stop the TNR orchestrated by the CCP and the Hong Kong government against us, it will very soon be my family members back home in Hong Kong being held hostage, forced to give me a call to ask me, an American citizen, to stop my advocacy here back home. That will happen very soon if we do not do anything to address the situation. I'm sure Francis and Jonathan will talk more also on the legislative actions and actions that should be taken by the administration, the State Department. But I just want to highlight 2 things very quickly. First of all, the HAUTOs that we have mentioned, they need to be shut down immediately in the U.S. All 3 of them in Washington, D.C., New York, San Francisco, they must be closed down. And then secondly, the Transnational Repression Policy Act, which we have right now, one in the Senate and then also one in the Congress. In the Transnational Repression Policy Act, there are several provisions which can actually be adopted by the State Department right now without the legislation even passing the Congress. So why are we not doing them? We need to establish the transnational repression as a key foreign priority. We need to urge the Interpol to stop cooperating with these authoritarian countries to ensure that the Interpol system will not be used against human rights defenders like us. We need to make sure that the Secretary of State, the State Department, will be working with other government agencies, including the FBI, the Homeland Security Department, to produce reports and concrete policy actions, actionable items to ensure the safety of our diaspora community here in the U.S. And last but not least, I have always said before all the congressional offices that I talk to and other stakeholders that safety and stability are the basis of what will allow Hong Kongers to continue educating this world, telling our story of how Hong Kongers have been on the front lines fighting against the CCP's lies and stories and expansion of communism, authoritarianism. Besides addressing TNR and then giving us that safety, it is so important that we also work on providing that stability for Hong Kongers here in the U.S. And that needs to begin with giving them a multi-entry, multi-year visa, which is also stated in Senator Ben Cardin's Human Rights Defenders Protection Act, so that they could come here in the U.S. to advocate for Hong Kong, to amplify our stories, and then before they had to go home under a safe condition. So I will end there, and thanks again for the committee for organizing this and having us.
Thank you very much, Joey. And Francis?
All right. Checking. Okay, great. Chairman Monoy, Ranking Member Krishnamurthy, and distinguished member of the Select Committee, thank you very much for leading this very important discussion and giving me an opportunity opportunity to brief you on this topic. Thank you for the very thorough introduction about me, and I just wanted to reaffirm here, as what I have said in other occasions with members of Congress, I will not stop what I have been doing here, and I will continue to my advocacy as a policy advocate and a community organizer. As many of you know, freedom in Hong Kong has deteriorated drastically in the past 5 years under the CCP's rule. As we speak, there are more than 1,800 political prisoners in Hong Kong. Among them, the oldest is 76-year-old Jimmy Lai, and the Hong Kong 47, a portion of whom are expecting verdict to come next week. Earlier this year, as ranking member have just mentioned, the Hong Kong government at the behest of Beijing passed Article 25 legislation, which some of us call the NSL 2.0, that expands the definition and extends sentences for national security crimes, making everyone around the world basically unsafe to criticize the Chinese and Hong Kong government, and basically engaging in any activities that they deem threatening China's national security. This move has been strongly criticized by the business community and civil society, as well as democratic allies around the world. Yet the U.S. State Department has only didn't offer more than deep concerns over the development. Imposing anonymous visa restrictions on Hong Kong officials is not enough. To facilitate the discussion today, I would like to offer 3 directions for a member of the Select Committee here. First, push the administration to impose sanctions on those responsible for implementing, enforcing, prosecuting, and ruling on national security law. Since 2021, no sanctions has been imposed despite intensifying repression and the severe deterioration of autonomy in Hong Kong. Although the U.S. has announced some visa restrictions, the impact is much less than a full U.S. sanctions, and it sends a message that the U.S. is stepping down from its previous strategy of holding these individuals accountable. We ask members of this committee to support and pass the H.R. 6153, the sanction legislation introduced in both the House and Senate last year, which listed a cross-section of 49 individuals who have manipulated this legal system in Hong Kong to crack down on pro-democracy protesters and advocates. It will require a determination by the State Department whether these individuals should be sanctioned under the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act and the Hong Kong Autonomy Act. In the past months, we have worked with other groups in the Hong Kong Coalition to submit a list to the State Department which corresponds to the list on the Sanction Act. And I'm happy to discuss more in depth of each case privately with you all if there's chance. But many of them are successors of officials who are already under U.S. sanctions due to human rights violations, and others whom we know are willingly participating in oppression. We believe that imposing U.S. sanction on these people is not only a punitive measures, but one that can have deterrence effect if it is combined with effective diplomacy. Second, the House should pass H.R. 1103, the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office's Certification Act, which would revoke the privileges and immunities granted to HKETOs and force them to be shut down unless autonomy is restored to Hong Kong. The Hong Kong government, as Joey just mentioned, has 3 HKETO locations in the U.S., including one here in Washington, D.C. Behind me is what looked like just another townhouse in the center of DuPont Circle. It is an outpost of the Hong Kong government to spy on overseas activists and influence American policies on China. Within the past month, German and British authorities combined have arrested 4 people who have been working for the local HKETOs on charges of espionage and surveillance. Since Hong Kong is no longer autonomous from China, the CCP should not have 2 diplomatic representations in the U.S. The HKETO Certification Act was introduced in both the Senate and the House with bipartisan support and passed both Foreign Affairs Committee last year. HFAC actually passed it with a vote of 39-0 almost 6 months ago. We haven't received an explanation about why the bill hasn't been put on the floor. And so So we want to ask your committee to weigh in with your leadership to ensure there is a vote as soon as possible. Relating to the HKETO, we're also supporting another bill, the HR 8125, to rename the street in front of the HKETO in DC as Jimmy Lai Way. We request that member of the committee also co-sponsor this legislation to remind people here and the CCP officials every day of Hong Kong's ongoing crackdown on advocates of freedom of expression and democracy. In the interest of time, I will submit other recommendations in writing if there's any way to do that. But it's fair to say that with 2 rounds of bounties issued on activists last year, the ongoing crackdown on Hong Kongers, the intensifying of transnational repression, and the passage of Article 23 legislation, the response by both the administration and Congress needs to be much stronger. We have to do more, and we need your help.
Thank you, and we would welcome your written comments as well. So thank you very much. And Jonathan Price.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd like to echo your words of encouragement and all really for the 2 women who sit beside me, for Francis and Joey. I am fortunate in that I don't have direct experience of this repression. I shouldn't be here. My client, Jimmy Lai, newspaperman, religious advocate for peace, shouldn't need an international human rights lawyer. By the terms of the Sino-British Declaration, as you've pointed out, Chairman, Hong Kong is supposed to be operating now under the principle of 1 country, 2 systems. It is supposed to have guaranteed fundamental freedoms to its citizens, such as the right to free speech, to peaceful protest. Those should have been preserved from handover in 97 until 2047. That hasn't happened. That's why we're all here. China and the Hong Kong government, which is now essentially a puppet government approved by Beijing, have treated the declaration as a non-binding set of aspirations rather than an international treaty capable of giving rise to proper legal obligations, which is how it was characterized when it was signed. Indeed, in 2017, the Chinese Foreign Minister described it as a historic document without any practical remaining significance. So I'm afraid that ship has sailed. But it's not just a matter of interest to international legal scholars. Hong Kongers have paid a heavy price for this. They continue to do so. They have lost those freedoms. It has impacted in a huge way on their day-to-day lives, and it's not just those in Hong Kong, as you've heard, it's those spread out all over the world, over whom China and Hong Kong consider they still have jurisdiction. But I'm here to talk about my client, Jimmy Lai, and about what happened to him and Apple Daily. In 97, he was a hugely successful garment retailer, hugely successful. He'd devoted his life to industry and had been very successful at it. And having witnessed the massacre at Tiananmen Square in 97, however, he dramatically changed the course of his life. He, with no experience in the media, chucked in the garment trade and opened a newspaper. As he told the New Yorker back in 2020, shortly after his first arrest, "Information is freedom," he said. "And I wanted to be in the business of delivering freedom." So he opened a newspaper. What else would you do? And his newspaper, Apple Daily, soon became the most successful Chinese language paper in the region. It's hard to overstate how enormous Apple Daily was at its zenith in terms of influence. And it was an early adopter of the internet too. But in 2019, the national security law was introduced to quell the peaceful pro-democracy protests that were then ongoing in the city. The national security law was roundly condemned at the time by governments, international organizations, the US, the UN, the UK, the EU. They all saw what was coming. They looked at the terms of the national security law and they criticized it as a tool of repression. They said it's so vague that it criminalizes any sort of anti-government speech. And lo and behold, because Apple Daily, the newspaper founded by Jimmy Lai, had vowed to hold people accountable, to speak truth to power, and occasionally, yes, to criticise the government and to seek a more democratic and free future for Hong Kong. In 2020, Jimmy Lai was arrested under the national security law very shortly after it came into force, and charged with various offences. And he's been in prison since December 2020, serving various sentences for offences such as participating in a march alongside 2 million other people, a quarter of Hong Kong's population, for lighting a candle at a vigil to remember the massacre at Tiananmen Square. He served 13 months for that. But now he faces the biggest judicial challenge. He faces a trial under the national security law. He's got 3 charges. One is sedition. The two others are national security charges. And his trial started in December last year after a year's delay. He has been on trial now for 6 months. And in that period, the prosecution have, as carefully as they can, and in the highest and most colourful possible terms, laid out their case against him, and they have put up witnesses, they have put up evidence, they have had access to all of his devices and his servers because they raided his office. They paid no heed to journalistic privilege, or legal privilege for that matter. They have everything he communicated, and they have failed to make a case against him. They will close their evidence in the coming weeks, and the sum total of what he is demonstrated to have done is conspiracy to commit journalism, to collude with international politicians to discuss international politics. In 2021, Apple Daily closed. That the voice was silenced. That vibrant, that loud, that cocky, that sometimes subversive voice snuffed out because the company that owned it, that Jimmy Lai owned, was put into administration by the Hong Kong government. And that company has several US citizens on its board, and that's a theme to which I'll return. So there you have a hugely successful media company closed down for daring to speak truth to power, to question the direction of travel of Hong Kong. You have an impressive advocate for peace and democracy in prison for almost 4 years. And the story of Jimmy Lai and Apple Daily is emblematic of the very rapid but almost total breakdown in the rule of law in Hong Kong over the last 5 years. From a thriving free market economy with an international outlook to the kind of jurisdiction where you can be arrested for liking a social media post, as people have. And picking up on something that Francis mentioned, here is a stark indicator of the precipitous decline in that once thriving jurisdiction. According to the Hong Kong Democracy Council, as of June 2019, there were 26 political prisoners in Hong Kong. 26. Now, by the same definition, by April 2024, that number had risen, as Francis mentioned, to over 1,800. That is a 7,000% increase in the space of 5 years. And that something must be going on in a jurisdiction where that happens. This per capita is ahead of Iran, Russia, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. It's on a par with Myanmar, Belarus, and Cuba. That's where Hong Kong now sits in the global scale of repression. Quite a lot has been written about how this happened, and much, much more will be written by historians, I have no doubt, but that's not what the focus of this roundtable is, I accept. It's a forward-looking discussion. How should the US respond? How should policy be shaped to confront what has happened? And it's important to understand that because this has happened so rapidly, despite Hong Kong's dramatic slide into authoritarianism, the US and Hong Kong retain surprisingly strong business and finance ties that you would not expect of a country in the same category as Belarus, Myanmar, and certainly not Cuba. And there are a couple of points that I want to leave you with to think about. In addition to what Francis and Joey have brought up, from our point of view, according to State Department figures, in 2022, approximately 1,258 US companies were based in Hong Kong. It's quite a sizable number, and some of them are very large. And the US remains one of the largest sources of foreign direct investment stock in Hong Kong. That's one thing, and I'll return to that shortly. And the other is this. It remains the case that only certain, and a very small number of jurisdictions, 4 in fact, are licensed to clear US dollar transactions outside of the United States. Tokyo, Singapore, Manila, and Hong Kong. And again, one might think that is a privilege that ought to be reviewed and revisited in light of the precipitous decline in the state of the rule of law in that jurisdiction. The license that the Hong Kong Monetary Authority has to clear dollar transactions is delegated by it to HSBC, for example. And only HSBC, but this is an example of the difficulty with this position. HSBC has a slightly coloured history in closing down the accounts of pro-democracy campaigns at the behest of the Hong Kong government. But should the US Treasury be rewarding a huge financial institution and Hong Kong itself with this sort of privilege in these circumstances, we ask? So, how long can all of this continue while Hong Kong slides into authoritarianism and is increasingly indistinguishable from mainland China? How long can the US government and US companies turn a blind eye, or in the memorable words of your predecessor, Chairman, how long can US companies wear golden blindfolds whilst they do business in Hong Kong? How long can they turn a blind eye to the fact that Hong Kong has imprisoned 1,800 political prisoners in the last 5 years? And the message, therefore, is simple, and I will conclude in a moment. Human rights must not be siloed from business and national security. Policy needs to be joined up. The US should examine the status of Hong Kong as a jurisdiction where dollars can be cleared. Should not be happening in a place where activists are routinely imprisoned. The US must continue to advise US businesses that they face grave and increasing risks by doing business in Hong Kong, and that by doing so they risk endorsing Hong Kong's authoritarianism. But not just that, there is risk to the organizations. The National Security Law and Article 23 empower the Hong Kong executive to delve into the information held by any company or any entity or any person doing business in Hong Kong at will, and to access client data, privileged data, financial data on a mere suspicion basis. And that's a matter of serious concern for US companies, particularly finance and legal companies doing business in Hong Kong. A robust rule of law and free media are essential for Hong Kong's future as a viable jurisdiction for US investment. That must be the principle that we hold on to. Now, we can either try to support Hong Kong in maintaining a robust rule of law and free media, or we can leave. We can't have it both ways. And Hong Kong, for its part, if it wishes to, can seek to demonstrate its commitment to these values by releasing Jimmy Lai immediately. And that's what we call upon it to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to now turn over to Mr. Luchtenmeyer with any questions you might have.
Mr. Chairman, you're always the first. You're going to defer that today? Okay. Thank all of you for being here and the sacrifices that you make to be able to be here, and the sacrifices that you make for freedom. It's a wake-up call for us here in this country to listen to folks like yourselves who have been maligned and injured and threatened. It shows the fragility of freedom, and we appreciate you being here today very much. Ms. Siu, you have some family members that are held hostage, is that correct? Or will be held hostage, or, okay. So when they're threatened like this, what happens? I mean, do they just, are they harmed physically, emotionally? They thrown in jail? They take their jobs away from them, take their homes away from them? What happens when you talk about that?
Yeah, so Congressman, I am in the United States right now. 4 years ago when I had to flee Hong Kong, my family members, although very worried about how I am going to survive in the U.S. all by myself, they are at least happy that I am leaving Hong Kong where I would be thrown into jail. They're happy that I'm coming back home where they thought I would be safe and free from the oppression from the Hong Kong government, the Chinese government. And unfortunately, that is not the case. Even on American soil, I'm still being wanted by the Hong Kong government. I still have to worry whether or not today, me speaking at this roundtable would get my family members back home in Hong Kong taken into interrogation or even thrown into prison for simply being related to me. That's something that I have to worry about on a daily basis before I come here to speak at a roundtable, before I post something on Twitter, before I engage or even speak to a journalist. I have to worry about that every single day. And speaking in terms of what the Hong Kong government can do about my family members back home, with the new implemented Article 23, there is just this wide range of trumped-up charges that they can press on my family members. They could say that they are violating national security law, they are stealing state secrets, they are engaged in subversion, terrorism, colluding with foreign forces simply for being related with me. So to avoid putting them at that risk of being persecuted, I cannot speak with my family members. I haven't seen my parents in 4 years. It was Mother's Day last week, and I couldn't even say Happy Mother's Day to my mom. I haven't spoken to her in 4 years. And
have you been threatened personally or injured as a result of attacks here in this country?
I have been receiving death threats and online harassment, as I say, on a daily basis across social media platforms, to a point where I had to report to the FBI of the situation because, as we have seen so many incidents happening, not just against the Hong Kong diaspora, but then also on Uyghurs, Tibetans, and we also saw how the Chinese government kidnapped Gui Minhai from Thailand for him to go to be tried back home in mainland China. We have seen so many possibilities and in so many ways how the CCP can put that physical harm on not just me, but the other Hong Kong activists here on American soil. So the worry is real. The worry is real. The terror is also real. But as we have said, we're not going to.
So does the FBI intervene here? Do they protect you? They listen to your concerns or investigate or anything like that? Or is the government pushing back against the individuals who are perpetrating this at all?
Yeah, so we do have regular communication with the FBI, but it stops there. And that is why I have been saying that what we have been doing right now is not enough. Because just by, us talking to the FBI, that is not going to stop transnational repression. After the arrest warrant for me, and then the bounty came out, the State Department, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, put out this tweet saying that we condemn this act of the Hong Kong government putting Hong Kong activists, including one American citizen, on this bounty list. However, that tweet is not going to stop the transnational repression against me. That is not going to stop my family members being put at the risk of persecution.
So you talked about Interpol being involved here. So China uses Interpol to track you down or Miss Hui down to the point where are your friends or family members or to intimidate you or give the Chinese information about you? Are they using Interpol in that way?
There have been too many instances of dictatorships and authoritarian countries manipulating and exploiting the Interpol system to put a red notice on human rights defenders, including, Leopoldo Lopez from Venezuela, and we see a very likely possibility.
How do we stop that from happening? How do we stop them from misusing Interpol? I mean, they're trying to use it to track criminals, I guess. In your situation, they consider you a criminal, but we have a different definition of criminal than what they do. How do we stop that from happening in our country?
I I think, first of all, it's very important for the United States government to take action to make sure that for the Interpol, we do have standards for what is actually criminals and what are human rights defenders that are being charged on an arbitrary basis by dictatorships, for example, like the Chinese Communist regime. We have to have that standard set. We have to have the U.S. government engage in that system, in that conversation.
Keep going. Okay. I got some questions for Mr. Price here with regards to, Hong Kong is a unique situation. You keep calling it a country, although it probably is more like a state or county or some other political subdivision within China. Is it no longer? Is that the situation today?
More or less. I mean, one can call it jurisdiction in the sense that it's
a part of China now, right?
Part of China.
So it would be, but it's autonomous with its government to a point.
To a point, and this is what's dissolving, and this is what's dissolved so rapidly. I mean, in '97, under the Joint Declaration.
But there still is enough government autonomy there to allow a lot of business to flow back and forth. Apparently, more than if it would be like Beijing or something like that.
Well, I mean, there's no material distinction any longer. Particularly now, Article 23 has been passed.
So when you talk about the business that Hong Kong and the United States have between each other, this is I sit on the Financial Services Committee, and I fight every day with the investor folks here in this country, whether it's the BlackRocks of the world, the Vanguards, or the J.P. Morgan, big banks, and say, look, you guys have got to stop investing in China. You cannot continue to feed the line that's going to eat us. You cannot continue to fund their activities, whether it be making military hardware or spying or be able to compete against us economically. You've got to stop doing this. And so is this a way for us, the United States citizens and our investors, to continue to get into China as they go through Hong Kong and then China?
It has been.
Is there a way to do that, or is it just a little bit different, more autonomous than that?
It has traditionally been precisely that. As sort of, one might describe it as sort of aircraft carrier for US business seeking to do business in China, so it's more just off the mainland. And it has had traditionally certain distinctions. It has a distinct customs regime, for example, and it has its own monetary authority, as I mentioned. But there has been, I mean, those institutions used to have some significance, some substantive meaning, and they used to be substantively distinct from China, but now they're all under Beijing's control. That's no longer the case. There's been complete regulatory capture.
Hong Kong used to be one of the biggest investment markets in the world,
yes.
Where people would invest through there, and it's amazing to see. So you're talking about the increased risks, and I think we as a committee need to continue to investigate the amount of investment that goes into Hong Kong from our markets. The listing of companies that are there in Hong Kong on our markets. We've talked about this at length before, but I think there's like 260 some companies still listed on our markets today. And I've got a bill that goes out there and makes them, have to be audited every year instead of every 2 years. And I think we need to continue to investigate, I think, that side of it, so we can kind of curtail that activity and keep our money from going there and help them to be able to oppress their people and build their military and economic engines against us.
So there are two reasons why you need to do what you've suggested, take those steps and increase the frequency of the reviews, for example. I mean, it's an excellent objective. And one is to make the point that you do, that they should not be aligning themselves with these human rights abuses, and they shouldn't be investing into these jurisdictions. But the other is more protective as well. There is a real risk that companies doing business in Hong Kong will become tainted by what will happen there. And as I said, in the 5-year period since 2019 that we've taken as the snapshot, under people's noses almost, there has been this dissolution in the rule of law. No one's really noticed, and that's why you need to keep these reviews up. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, finish up. I got one more final question.
What I wanted to say about this other reason is this, that we have seen, and this is why you need to do these reviews, we have seen a a brain drain from Hong Kong. We have seen an outflow of money. We've seen financial services companies and legal services companies leaving. We've seen people seat their arbitrations in Singapore or elsewhere in the region rather than Hong Kong. And so, but the systems and machinery in Hong Kong is still in place. It's still a financial centre. But what happens when that legitimate money leaves? When the legitimate activity leaves town? What is that machinery going to do? It's going to find work, and that work that it's going to find is almost certainly not going to be good. And there's a real risk that Hong Kong will become a pariah state, and it will use this machinery for bad purposes, for money laundering, and we're seeing that increasingly. Sorry.
Yeah, one last question. I appreciate the chairman's indulgence here. One of the things, we had a tabletop exercise a year or so ago about whenever China invades Taiwan, and our generals here in this country say that's going to happen within the next years. And then what happens? Basically, there was agreement that, and from that exercise, that China invades, we sanction China. We'll sanction China while they're going to nationalize all of our assets that we have and probably throw our people in jail in these detention camps. And so, as I talk to the investor folks, the BlackRocks of the world, and those folks, and I ask them, why in the world are you taking this kind of risk? Because if this happens, you're going to lose everything, all the investments you have there. Would you agree with that scenario? Would you agree with my review of the situation? And
that is a feasible outcome, and no doubt these companies who invest hugely in risk mitigation themselves will have. But
all their money is at risk, is what you're saying.
Yes. Yeah.
So whenever everything collapses and they nationalize everything, their money is going to be gone. All those investments, all those assets are going to be gone.
There is certainly a risk of that. There must be. For the reasons.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for bringing this meeting together, and thanks, Mr. Luchtemeier, for your probing questions. Interesting. Appreciate all you guys being here, and probably don't appreciate to the extent the risk you're taking for being here. So thank you for that. I had the privilege of going to Hong Kong in the early 1980s and saw it as the vibrant economic city that it was. It was just an exciting place to be in. I haven't been back recently, but from what I understand, it's not anywhere close to that any longer, which is truly a shame. That was I guess, an anticipated outcome of turning it back over to China, but treaties are treaties, and that's was honored. It has become clearer since then that the terms of the one country, two systems agreement is no longer being honored by China, which is unfortunate for the people that live there, the families of the people that are related to the people that live there. So I guess my curiosity is probably along the lines of what is it the United States can do pragmatically or realistically. Certainly the notion of having, in the picture that the young lady showed of the presence right here in this city of the CCP having a presence in other cities. We've uncovered that. I think the committee learned that there's a presence in New York City and others places around the country. Police agencies that are doing exactly what you said, Ms. Siu, monitoring a potential, I guess, what they see as adversaries to the CCP. So we could, and maybe this is a question, should we repeal the United States Hong Kong Policy Act altogether and treat Hong Kong as just a part that is of the PRC, totally indistinguishable? What kind of things, leverage do we have as a country, as a U.S. government, over the authorities of the PRC in Hong Kong? And I guess how can we better use those authorities to protect freedoms and rights of individuals there? But if that is the case, if Hong Kong, it truly is just another province or another city in the PRC, truly what can we do about those issues? And if we are successful, will Jimmy Lai be released? Will the other 1,800 people that are being held be released? Will those that continue to break what are seen as laws against the state, at least as determined by the CCP, will that change at all? Shed a little light on some of the things that you think are possible for us actions to take and potential outcomes.
Well, I just very quickly will, and then I'll just make a couple of points about this. This is a myth sometimes amongst the international community that China doesn't care what we think of China, but that's not right. I mean, particularly in relation to Hong Kong, there's recently been a huge mobilization that one can only describe as an international reputation management program in relation to Hong Kong. They are trying very hard to push the narrative that Hong Kong is open for business. I mean, so it obviously matters to them that Hong Kong is open for business. And there's sort of two responses to that. One is to say, well, it's not really open for business in this free sense that we want it to be, because we're concerned that you can't speak freely in Hong Kong apart from anything else, so you can't really do business there. That's one thing. But the other is to push back and expose at every turn what really is happening there, and to remind China and Hong Kong of what they've done to the place, and not to fall for the spin, and to say, well, you say it's open for business, but do you really mean that when you're holding 1,800 people in prison? I mean, we for example, we're engaging quite a lot with the UN. Something I should add, which they've sought to criminalise, that under the national security law now, apparently, if you advocate in the UN for anything that might be vaguely critical of China, you might be committing an offence under the national security law. China has been recently asked to confirm that cannot possibly be the case, and their answer is, well, maybe it is.
Maybe not.
So just see how far you want to push it. And Sebastian Lai, Jimmy Lai's son, was speaking at the UN. He was interrupted twice by the Chinese delegation there, and afterwards it was made clear that he could not return to Hong Kong because he was at risk of arrest for advocating for his father's right to peaceful protests. He was speaking in the session with the Special Rapporteur on peaceful assembly, and as if to make their point for them, China said, well, you can't do that, or we'll put you in prison. But so the point I want to make is that despite all of that, China does engage with the UN. They do engage in the UPR process. They sent 160 people to Davos, the largest delegation. They've sent a huge delegation to the UN. I hear that when they landed in Dublin, they brought with them the largest passenger plane ever to land in Dublin at Dublin's airport. The Hong Kong Bar Association has been on a sort of road show trying to convince people that the rule of law still exists in Hong Kong. So I think it's not as bleak as perhaps one might think. There's still some sensitivity, and I think that can be used. And therefore, we would encourage the US to remind China at every engagement that they are not presenting a very good picture to the world. That we see them, we see what they're doing.
And they care about that.
They do care about that. They care about that more than they would let on.
Well, I think we're all here trying to figure out what the U.S. can do more. And despite we have talked a lot about, Hong Kong is facing the problem of deteriorating of freedom. Right now, it looks like it's very bleak, but it's important for us to remember that there are actually a lot of people still staying in Hong Kong. Either they chose to stay in Hong Kong or they're staying in Hong Kong by force, that they cannot leave Hong Kong. So is there a way that we can support the people of Hong Kong as well? There are a ton. I I mentioned the HKETO offices, although they are all based around the world, they're not based in Hong Kong, but they are enabling the government and trying to paint a picture about Hong Kong. It's normal again. Nothing happened back in 2019 to 2020. There's no political prisoners in Hong Kong. Everyone is welcome to do business with us. And so they are here actively engaging with businesses and investors, trying to encourage them to do business in Hong Kong and to visit Hong Kong. And to your question about, stopping investors to invest in Hong Kong, I think one of the ways to do this is to make sure we shut down the HKETO in the U.S. We're not only concerned about how they are, conducting transnational repression here in the U.S. and espionage activities. We're also concerned about them basically using the resources here and to encourage businesses to do business in Hong Kong as if there's nothing happened, right? We want to stop that. And so that's why it's so important to look into the problem with HKETOs. Second, the thing with sanction, it's not just for punishing the perpetrators and the human rights violators. As I mentioned, there is a deterrence effect. And we know that people, on the list that we provided to the State Department, it's a cross-section of officials, judges, and prosecutors. These people are responsible for putting 1,800 political prisoners in jail. They put these people in jail and they actively participate in oppression. Why do I say that? Because they actually have a choice to not do that. They actually can refuse to preside in political cases. Their peers have done so. And the reason why these people are listed on the Sanction Act is because they actively volunteer to do this. And in a lot of the cases that was listed in the Sanction Act, actually these people, we have found evidence of judges and prosecutors manipulating evidence in pursuit of conviction and egregious sentences, longer sentences. Jimmy Lai, he was convicted for a fraud charge, which is like a simple lease violation that can be settled with just a fine, right? But he was put in jail for 4 years and 9 months.
5 years and 9 months.
5 years and 9 months.
Violating a commercial lease over an office considerably smaller than the size of this room.
Right, and so it's not about the national security law, right? There is also the colonial era sedition law, and also they're basically using the legal system to try to trump up charges against these activists. They're using any way they can to put charges on these people. And so the Sanctions Act and, pushing the administration to impose sanctions on these officials and judges and prosecutors is really important. And there is a way of deterring this behavior.
Do you think you mentioned that they're trying to say that we're open for business, please come and invest. Is that message, according to Mr. Luchtmeyer, we still have a lot of U.S. companies doing business there. What about like French companies or other European countries or others around the world? Is that message getting through? Are people coming and taking advantage of Hong Kong being open for business?
It is. Actually, the HKETO is working really close with other departments in the Hong Kong government. And the Hong Kong government, the Hong Kong Tourism Board, every year they produce promotional videos welcoming businesses all around the world to come and do business in Hong Kong. And in the video, there are MCHAM, presidents of business chamber, of people like from France and from Germany, EU, and our own MCHAM president in Hong Kong are also featured in the video. And so they're all working together with the Hong Kong government to tell people that, everything is normal, right? There's no political prisoners, but we know for a fact that there are political prisoners, and where in this world that an international financial center would have political prisoners, right?
So can you guys share with us, did you both live in Hong Kong at one point?
We're both born and raised in Hong Kong.
What's it like today living there? The media there, I'm sure, comes out of Beijing or somewhere in the mainland, or at least some of it. Do people, tell us how people discern the media from the mainland versus maybe other sources within Hong Kong or other parts of the world, and also with communications such as they are, they see what other countries are experiencing. They remember, a lot of people remember what it used to be prior to 1997, I'm sure. Tell us what the feeling is like amongst the Hong Kongers.
Congressman, I was born in North Carolina, but then I grew up in Hong Kong and moved back when I was 6 years old. And growing up every year around June 4th, the next day we would see this front page on almost every single newspaper inside of Hong Kong showing pictures of the candlelight vigil that we hold on an annual basis at Victoria's Park in Hong Kong, commemorating those who have passed away back in 1999 during the Tiananmen massacre. However, now we see that those newspapers who were publishing these reports on June 4th, candlelight vigils, Apple Daily, Stand News, all of these have been shut down inside of Hong Kong after the national security law came into place. Back in Hong Kong, back when the days when I was still attending, elementary school, middle school, high school, even for the relatively more pro-China, pro-Beijing news media, TVB and then the others, even for those relatively pro-Beijing media enterprises, they will still have the guts to talk about June 4th, about U.S. politics, about everything that the Chinese Communist Party have been doing. But now it is impossible to see them inside of Hong Kong. And it is not just about the local media in Hong Kong that is being censored, shut down, the pro-democracy papers that are being forced to cease operations, but increasingly over the past few years we have been seeing how the Foreign Correspondents Club in Hong Kong being forced to censor themselves, to cancel events about freedom of speech, freedom of expression inside of Hong Kong. We have seen foreign journalists denied a visa to enter Hong Kong or to continue reporting from inside of Hong Kong. We see international media outlets having to lay off their Hong Kong staff for the fear of their staff being persecuted under the national security law, and obviously the new Article 23 simply for reporting on news on political issues happening in Hong Kong or the trials happening in Hong Kong. And very quickly, Congressman, I also want to go back to your question on what exactly the U.S. government can do. Last year, the Hong Kong diaspora here in the U.S. launched this campaign to have the U.S. government ban the Chief Executive John Lee from entering the U.S., attending the APEC summit. Very immediately after that campaign was being launched by the diaspora, the Hong Kong government announced this new budget to for the government to do promotions, propaganda to tell the good Hong Kong story, and that shows that they do care. They care a lot about what the international community thinks about Hong Kong, and that is why I strongly echo what Jonathan have been saying. We must seize every single opportunity we have, from roundtables like this to other State Department speaking out about political prisoners in Hong Kong. We must talk about Hong Kong continuously, ongoing business environment, political prisoners. We must keep talking about that. And in terms of business, there have been efforts from the community, trying to engage with the business, but whenever they hear the words human rights activists, they run faster than Travis Kelce trying to catch a touchdown ball. So I think this is where the Congress and then the State Department can come into place. They are willing to talk to the Congress. They're willing to talk to the Select Committee. They're happy to talk with the State Department. And this is where we need the U.S. government to take actions on educating these businesses who are still operating inside of Hong Kong of the risk of them potentially violating the national security law or potentially having to submit their business secrets, their confidential information to the Hong Kong government, because now we have the Article 23, which expanded the definitions of national secret to cover essentially the definitions of state secret to cover essentially everything. Corporation registration, how many staff you have, what are their salaries, what they have been doing, communicating with those who are back home in America. All of these things, the Hong Kong government now have the authority to have them submit to the government under Article 23. And I think this is where really the Congress and the State Department can come into place on educating these businesses of these increasing risks.
So, Mr. Chairman, just one more quickly to clarify. then the question about whether or not we should repeal completely the U.S.-Hong Kong Policy Act and treat them just like, any other, I'll say, city in China, same as Shanghai or Beijing or Kunming or anywhere else. If we did that, then would we work against that small amount of autonomy that still exists and maybe close the door on any progress we might make that you're suggesting we should continue the pressure on? Would that be a mistake to remove that act?
Congressman, I do think that would be the last resort. I think, before we think about repelling the Hong Kong policy, I do think there's still so many more other solutions which the U.S. government can take, including shutting down Hong Kong economic and trade offices, including, encouraging U.S. businesses to retreat from Hong Kong, or other many resolutions that all the three of us here have talked about. Personally, I do think imposing targeted sanctions on individuals and targeted corporations that have been complicit in human rights violations and advocating or involved in a direct implementation of national security law and Article 23. I think it's important to impose targeted sanctions on them. However, I do think that repelling the Hong Kong Policy Act would almost equal to a blanket sanction on Hong Kong as a city itself. So I do think that potentially, if all of these efforts that we could take are not working, I do think that could be the last resort, the last possibility. But at this moment, I think there's still so many other things that the U.S. government, the Congress, the administration can consider before thinking about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank the two of you for your courage, for your insights, wisdom, being willing to be here with us today and share your story and just the impact that this has had on your lives, and giving us ideas on how we can hopefully make things better. And I'm very grateful for that. And I want to ask all of you just, some of the ideas that you've suggested we can follow up on, and I think they're very helpful. One question I had, and Mr. Price, you had mentioned, the idea of Jimmy Lai being released, and what impact would that have? I mean, obviously for him, for his family, what kind of a message would that send, and how could that moving forward help improve the situation overall?
So it would make credible the message that Hong Kong is open for business, that it is rule of law compliant, that it does respect freedom of speech and freedom of the press, that it's not repressive and it's not increasingly authoritarian. It would show the world that it's a fair place, a place where justice is still achievable, and so it would be hugely symbolic from that point of view. And there's no doubt that Hong Kong has changed, and the possibility of it returning in to exactly how it was previously is fairly slim. But there has been only one direction of travel in recent years. And that paints a fairly grim future for Hong Kong, and that is not optimistic. It's not the picture they want to show the world. Why would you go and move a young family there if you're an American going to try and make your way in finance, for example, or open some other sort of business? Why would you wouldn't do it in circumstances where they've locked up 1,800 people, including a 76-year-old newspaperman. So releasing him would be really symbolic. You're right, it would have a huge impact on his family and his supporters. But more than that, it would show that there is some credence to the message they've been trying to send out. And part of everything else, it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's important that we continue to mention Free Jimmy Lai, mention their name, say their name, and raise their public profile in any diplomatic engagements with these PRC officials and the Hong Kong officials. We know that the HKETO is sponsoring a lot of these. They're helping government officials to come to the U.S. The upcoming trip actually is next week. Paul Chan is going to come to the U.S. to San Francisco, and he's going to say the same thing to promote Hong Kong as a business financial hub, welcoming businesses. And so in those kind of scenarios, when State Department is meeting these officials, they have to mention his name, bring it up to, in any engagements with Xi Jinping or any Chinese officials. And I also just want to add on the point, we're a lot of times we think about Hong Kong right now, like, again, bleak future, and people are leaving. There's a mass exodus happening. But again, there are a lot of people that are still in Hong Kong, and they are also carrying the fight for freedom in a more subtle way. And the way we can support them is to make sure that we are using this space and freedom to speak up for them, right? I like to say that they're not voiceless because they are still trying their best to do something in Hong Kong. And what we're here to do is to make up our promise, to show that, we're supporting Hong Kong and we're doing our best to continue to support Hong Kong. And there is a saying in our community that perhaps after the trial of Jimmy Lai, the issue of Hong Kong would be gone. Like, no one is going to pay attention to Hong Kong anymore. And a lot of us are afraid that's the truth. And so we're trying our best to resist that reality. In fact, Hong Kong are still very relevant. In fact, there are a lot of things that we can still do to support the people in Hong Kong and outside of Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. And the recommendations we have mentioned are ways that we can do that.
Thank you. Ms. Siu?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think obviously the symbolic meaning of Jimmy Lai, who is now being framed as this mastermind behind our 2019 pro-democracy movement, or even before 2019, all these pro-democracy advocacies in Hong Kong, obviously if we could, advocate successfully for the release of Jimmy Lai, that would be very, very significant, very, very symbolic. But I do also want to stress that, our advocacy or the U.S. policy towards Hong Kong cannot stop there. After Jimmy Lai, there are still 1,800 political prisoners inside, jails for hanging a banner saying "Free Hong Kong," running for elections, and that includes so many of my friends, so many of my classmates when I was in school inside of Hong Kong. So I think it is definitely a stark reminder to the international community of the situation inside of Hong Kong. And back in 1997, when the Sino-British Joint Declaration was signed between the PRC and the UK government, that was not signed in private. That was signed under the witness of the international community, including in the US, and the PRC violating the Sino-British Joint Declaration. That is a responsibility that all of our countries, including the US, especially the US and the UK, as leaders of the democracy, have to, commit to. That is a responsibility, a moral obligation for us to, continue advocating for. So once again, obviously the policy recommendations that we have laid out here, but we also do want to see, from the committee, from the U.S. administration, the continuous advocacy for Jimmy Lai and then the other 1,800 political prisoners.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you, all three of you, for being here, and just appreciate the opportunity to get to know you and to learn from you. So thank you very much. And with that, if there's anything else you would like to say, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.